Ladies and gentlemen, Panzer here, and welcome to Farthest Frontier, a survival city builder game made by the developers of Grim Dawn. And of course, in that sense, it's very similar to a game such as Banished, and some might say that game has needed a proper spiritual successor for a while, and I'm not 100% sure this is it just yet, but it is in early access, so that remains to be seen. So first things first, we're going to start a new settlement. And here we are presented with a couple of difficulty options, and of course Vanquisher being the hardest difficulty and Pioneer being the easiest. And of course the typical random settlement name that you have here. I think we're going to go with, there we go, Woodvale, kind of a neutral, kind of nice sounding place. I guess you can call it that. Aside from just the difficulty settings, there is one particular setting here, which is terrain, that actually affects the difficulty more than the base difficulty settings would suggest. Mainly because these terrain options actually decide what your starting resources will be like. And given that every city kind of needs the same sort of resources, this actually determines in a more direct fashion how difficult your start is going to be. So we could leave it at random. I have played on the plains and the alpine valleys, and those have seemed to be the easiest starts. Lowland Lake seems to be, as the game already suggests, an easy environmental difficulty, and the arid highlands being one of the harder ones. So I think just to show off the game, we're going to go with the plains, just to hopefully be a little bit more neutral here. And let's get into the game. Now, the advanced settings here will allow you to change the difficulty settings for each individual thing. Now, there are raiders, so enemies will attack your settlement from time to time, and this setting will affect that. That's something that you didn't really get in Banished, but then again, things like disease and starvation was a much bigger problem. The map seed, of course, can be chosen up here, so if you wish to share map seeds with friends, that is a possibility here. Right. Let's begin. Alright, it seems that we're loaded into the game. Now, there is a short freeze that you've just seen there before the first pop-up comes up. And if, depending on how fast your PC is, I think it seems to be dependent on hardware, that will affect how long that actual freeze is. So don't worry, the game didn't crash. It's just this version of the game does that. Now, the reason it's doing that is because it's scouting the surrounding area, as it says in this, this little pop-up window here. And what that's doing is it's providing you with a visible area with which to start your town center. Now, that area doesn't stay visible. So the area that you have to work with will be dependent on where you place your town center. But this is just to give you a lay of the land so you can decide where to start off. So we're going to hit confirm here, and then we're going to pick a spot to place our town center. Now, you can see we have quite a wide area here. And the game runs pretty good at this stage. It does seem to progressively worsen. I'm not sure if anyone else has had this problem, but it does seem to progressively worsen over time. Now, you will see all the resource pop-ups here. Unfortunately, at this point in time, we can't actually really get a good look at all of these things. So if you're not sure what these icons are, mousing over them will tell you the name of it, but nothing more than that. So you kind of have to guess what most things are. There is a color coding system, so you can tell what minerals are versus greens and such, which are food, and then you've got clay, which will be minerals, and the orange color there. So I think over here is where we're probably going to look at starting out. There aren't much in the way of mineral deposits at all. I haven't seen much in the way of iron or gold, and that's going to prove tricky in the late game, but at this stage of the game, food is our biggest priority. So we will have to think about those resources as we go. But for now, this kind of area looks like a good place to start. There's some greens, there's some deer. We've got a little bit of clay, which is useful for farming. And I believe I saw sand up here as well. You do need sand for that too. And of course, the shoal of fish will help us to bring in some food. So I think this area down here is a good place to start. There's a good abundance of trees as well to get us our starting lumber that we need. So I'm going to place this here. And as soon as I click yes, you're going to see most of the map turn black. Mainly because that is outside of the town center radius, and you need to go and scout that area again. So try to remember where most things are when you get a look at it, because that will help you find them again later on. Unfortunately, you do have to go and explore on your own, so you don't get the full map view at this stage for sure. So let's go. Alright, and there we go. So now you can see we just have the circle around the town center, which is visible to us. And we do have those resources that I was talking about available to us. So right now the pressing issues are the villagers are homeless. And their stock of firewood is low. And of course, being that it's early spring, that is a little bit of a problem because it is quite cold out. Thankfully, everyone seems to be equipped with good clothing. They've got linen and hide coats and shoes, so they are quite well equipped for the weather, and that will become important later on. So the hide coats do protect them from the weather. They also protect them from wild animals and prevent them from getting injured too easily while working. So there, much like Banished, there are random events that can occur, which will cause them to suffer some ill effects, let's say. So right now the villagers will want to build the town center, so we need to designate some resources for harvesting. And the good thing about that is the system is quite simple. So when we select the harvest button down here, you can actually just highlight based on what you've selected here. So we select trees, stones, bushes, berries, all that, and we can just drag and select the entire area, and it will highlight everything that needs to be collected. Now, whether or not you want to do it this way or not, you can choose to do that, or I believe you can cancel it by deselecting. Yes, shift select to deselect that. So let's say we don't want to harvest anything too close to the water. We don't want to harvest anything that's too close to the deer. Obviously, deforesting will help to deplete the resources faster, and you don't want to do that. Alright, so we can send the camera back on the village, and we'll let them do their thing. Alright, so now the town center is built. They're going to get busy harvesting the resources that we selected earlier. So it's time to start thinking about building. You have everything set up in these different categories. So housing, of course, is under housing, but you have all sorts of other menus here, and initially it is a little bit tricky to figure out what goes where. Now, food production is all one thing on its own, so that includes all the gathering, hunting, and farming. But storage is where the food storage is as well. So you got the root cellar, you got the granaries. And there's a kind of a criticism with the game is that the buildings have prerequisites, and you have to know what these prerequisites are. Now, it does tell you what the prerequisite for that particular building is. So to build a saw pit, we need a stockyard, and that's pretty simple to figure out. The stockyard is available to us here. But as you go along, some buildings will require more prerequisites. So we've got a storehouse and a saw pit. And so when you have these buildings that then have prerequisites, which themselves have other prerequisites, you got to chase that chain back down to know where everything is. So a little bit of a quality of life issue or quality of life fix here would be to then show what the prerequisites are in an actual flowchart or chain in the tooltip here, rather than just the prerequisite building for this one. So for a work camp, we need a stockyard and a wagon shop. So you can see here, okay, we need a stockyard and a wagon shop. So the stockyard is here, but where's the wagon shop? It's here in Tier 2, and Tier 2 requires a town center. So again, having that sort of chain be visible is a lot easier to figure out where everything is. So of course, before our villagers get too unhappy, we want to set them up with housing. Now we can do these shelters, which will go, these are actual modular buildings, so they do actually, I don't think modular is the right word, but the shelters themselves will upgrade as technology improves, so you do have your tier upgrades for the town center, and as resources become available. You can have that to be automatically upgraded. If you choose, they will do that on their own. But for now, the main thing we want to be careful of course, is desirability. So you can see right here, everything kind of has a neutral desirability. So you can't have some buildings be too close to each other because they will have a negative effect. So in theory, most industrial buildings will have a negative effect. So I'm going to place down these houses first. We'll get 4 houses for now. And I'm going to show you, so if we have now, you can see at the top right of the tooltip there, this has neutral desirability. So I could place this near to our housing here, and I might want to because this is fertile ground right here. But if I was to, let's say, get a firewood splitter, and its desirability is 2 negatives, so it's got 2 arrows pointing down, mainly due to noise, I believe. So if we place that, then the area, you can see the little red spot that kind of follows it around. That's going to make this area less desirable, and it's going to lead to villagers being unhappy. Now, while we're talking about that, I want to set up the fishing shack, because we do have fisheries. Oh, there are more settlers wishing to join, and so we have a little objective to complete, and these will pop up from time to time, little random objectives to complete. So having a 4-month supply of food and 6 houses, not that difficult. This one isn't particularly random. This comes up every single time, but there are some that will be a little bit more random than that. But first, I'm going to put this fishing shack down. He's going to make sure that the entrance is somewhere that the roads are able to reach. And I believe this is a pretty good spot. Fishing productivity is good, so we're going to go with that. Now, on the subject of roads, roads actually very greatly affect the speed at which your villagers are able to get around. So it's a good idea to have them. However, the road building system is a little bit finicky at this point in time. As you can see, it's lagging the game already, but it likes to create these really, really gentle curves, which is great for aesthetic purposes. It does actually look very nice when it curves really well. Like, you can create a gentle curve like this. However, it tries to curve in places, and when your village is, if you're like me anyway, and you build everything close together so you're not wasting space, it makes it very hard to actually build these roads because it tries to connect it in ways that it clearly isn't designed to do. So it also has a minimum distance. You can see there's a minimum size. So unless you have another node to connect it to, so let's say I want to just have 2 squares here, it won't let me do that. Unless I place another road starting here and go like this, then it will actually let me do that and connect it like that. Otherwise, it wouldn't let me do that at all. So it can be a little bit annoying, but for easily create... And see, even there, I was able to create a 2 square size, and it didn't have any issues with that. So, yeah, the road building system is a little bit finicky. It doesn't quite work super well just yet, but I'm hoping they fix that. After all, this is an early access game. It will probably get fixed eventually. Right, to complete our objective, we need some additional housing, so I'm going to throw that in. And of course, we needed a firewood splitter, so I'm going to put one somewhere a little far away because I don't want it to be too close to the houses that we have, but at the same time, not so far away that it takes forever to actually get to. Now, of course, in the same way, the hunter's cabin can be placed somewhat near where the resources are. The deer don't seem to mind that there's a hunter's cabin placed right on top of where they are. They really don't mind about that, which is a little bit strange, but we'll go with it. Now, one thing that I am a little bit concerned about is the fact that this clay deposit has housing next to it. So when we do build the clay pit, we may end up having to relocate those houses. Slight oversight there on my part, but now the villagers that were asking to migrate have now arrived, and we have the housing for them. Now, sometimes you may want to say no to these kind of events, just in case you don't have the food for it or anything like that. But in this case, there's no reason to say no, and more hands helping out is always great. So now they have migrated in, and you can see our food stores seem to have gone down, and that's because of the amount of villages we actually have. Now, of course, mousing over it, you can see the exact amounts of everything, but what the game handily does is it actually shows you, in terms of months, how long your food is going to last. And, of course, how much food is going to spoil within 12 months. So, while the food spoilage is not the biggest of issues, the amount of months that you have stored up definitely is. And you can reduce the amount of spoilage by having storage that is conducive to that. Right now, everything is being kept in the storage cart, which is not ideal, but it is a good temporary storage. So, obviously, to fix that, we would have a root cellar, and that will help us to store the food in a more sustainable way. Alrighty, our crops are ready for assignment on the field here, and it's quite a good-looking little field here. I have realized that the deer are very, very close to here, and I can't remember if the deer or is it other animals that actually eat the crops when you plant them, so I put a little fence out hoping that might stop them from doing it. I have no idea, but if it doesn't work that way, there's a great waste of resources. But I do want to show how the crop rotations work. So every crop field has a set number of rotations, and you have a little indicator right here of where we are in the year. So of course, when we add crops, you want to be having a close look at how long they take to grow and what sort of tolerances they have. So carrots have a pretty poor heat tolerance. You don't want to plant them in the middle of summer. So carrots at the beginning of the year, not a bad idea. But in the middle of the year, might actually not be the best. Now, we are already some ways into the year, so we're not going to get much of a yield out of that. Now, peas have very high frost tolerance, but absolutely no heat tolerance. Beans have very high heat tolerance, so we'll probably want those. You also want to be paying close attention to what is actually being produced. So vegetables and greens are two separate groups of vegetables, and you do want to have a decent variety of both to keep everyone happy and healthy. Now, you've got more complex crops such as wheat. Of course, you'll require a mill to make that work. Same with rye. You also have greens like cabbages. And there's also crop maintenance. So you can set a field maintenance period instead of growing crops, and that will help with this. We have a very high weed level right now, which is a very big problem. And also you want to pay attention to fertility as well as the soil mixture. The other thing that can happen is, of course, disease for crops. This is entirely random, and also it can depend largely on the healthiness of your field to begin with. So you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on those things and trying to keep the crops as healthy as possible. So I want to switch over to our second area here. Of course, you can't plant or harvest anything in the winter, so this entire area is blocked out. So you've got 3 months of the year that you can't use. So you want to utilize it as well as you can. So we have the cabbages at the beginning of the year. Cabbages have fantastic frost tolerance and heat tolerance. Right, now that we have our crop rotation set up, this will cycle through all the way, and it is a 3-year crop cycle. If you leave any of these empty, it basically means that that's an empty period where nothing happens. And we do have a little bit here, but I want to have a mixture of vegetables and greens as much as possible. Greens tend to spoil very easily, so you don't want to have them for too long, but having something that stores for a long time is definitely very good. So root vegetables are great. And of course, leaving time for field maintenance is also a very, very good idea. So you can see our carrots have now been harvested, and the field is ready for the next planting. So carrots being very, very good. And we can see it has an impact on our food stores. We have a lot of vegetables stored now. So that should tide us over for the rest of the year fairly well on its own. And because they are root vegetables, they're not going to spoil very easily, so there's only an expected spoilage of about 1 or 2 months. Additionally, you may have noticed some other products there like dairy, fruit, and of course there are preserves and so on. All of these come at the mid to late game. So you have such things as bakeries where you can produce bread, and bread is definitely a very, very good source of food. However, it is also very complex to produce. The barn, where you can have dairy production from cows, as well as the arborist, where you can grow fruit. On top of that, you also have the cheesemaker and the preservist that will turn dairy and fruit respectively into the products from that, which have an even better shelf life and also are way more nutritious and provide more food. Now on top of that, you also have things such as the soap shop, the apiary. All these happen at tier 2, and it is very, very heavy at tier 2 with the resource production. There's a lot that happens there. Tier 3 is where you start producing products for trade as well as use, so you have weapons, heavy tools and equipment that are required for some building production but also are very useful for trading. Overall, I'd say the pacing of the game is pretty good, but the only issue I have is I feel like the base game speed is a little too fast. I think the seasons go by a little too quickly, and sometimes it doesn't give you enough time to react, especially at the very early stages of the game. There is a slow motion option, and you can play with pause if you so choose, but at the end of the day, the seasons still go a little bit too fast for my liking, and it does make it a little tricky when you're playing the game for the first time. Later on, it's probably not so big a deal once you're a little bit more experienced, but as a new player, this might be a problem. Overall, I'd say as an early access title, this is shaping up to have a lot of potential. It runs well, it's decently priced, and I don't really have too many complaints. It's a very good looking game and it runs very well for a colony builder. I will say as the game progresses and villages become bigger, the performance does tend to slowly start getting worse, and it seems to be proportionate to the amount of villages you have. I noticed that when I started to pass about 80 villages, it starts to get a little bit slow and there's occasional stutters. There's the occasional frame rate stutters every now and then, but that's to be expected with an early access game. But just bear in mind as your village gets bigger, at this stage of development, the game does have a couple of performance issues at that point. But up until then, it's still pretty solid. And that's where I'm gonna leave it there. The game has a lot of potential, and I do hope it continues to get developed consistently. My name is Panzer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.